Discovering that the person you just agreed to spend your life with has been hiding a six-figure gambling debt for your entire relationship is the kind of gut punch that makes you question everything you thought you knew about them and wonder what else they've been lying about. So I'm a 30-year-old woman, and I got engaged 2 months ago to my boyfriend of 3 years, Jake. And I thought I knew everything important about him. We'd had all the big conversations about kids and careers and money and life goals, and I genuinely believed we were financially compatible and ready to build a life together. Jake has a good job as an IT manager making around $90,000 a year, and I'm a teacher making about $55,000. And we'd talked extensively about our finances before getting engaged, because I'm a practical person who wanted to make sure we were on the same page about money before making a lifetime commitment. During those conversations, Jake told me he had about $10,000 in student loans that he was paying off, and he had decent credit. And when I asked if he had any other debt, he said no, just the student loans. And I trusted him because why would I assume my partner was lying about something so fundamental? After we got engaged, we decided to move in together and start combining our finances gradually, and I suggested we each pull our credit reports so we could see the full picture of our financial situation and make a plan for paying off debt and saving for the wedding and a house. And Jake seemed supportive of this idea and agreed we should be transparent about everything. I pulled my credit report first and shared it with Jake. I have excellent credit and no debt except my car loan, which has about $8,000 left on it. And I was proud to show him that I'd been financially responsible and we'd be starting our marriage on solid ground from my side at least. When I asked Jake to pull his credit report, he kept making excuses about being too busy or forgetting to do it. And after 2 weeks of this, I started to get suspicious, and I asked him directly if there was something he didn't want me to see, and he swore there wasn't, and he'd pull the report that weekend. That weekend came and went with more excuses, and I finally told Jake that I was pulling his credit report myself using a service I had access to through my bank. And if he had nothing to hide, then he shouldn't have a problem with this. And he got really quiet and said, actually, maybe we should talk first before I did that. My stomach dropped, because I knew that meant there was definitely something he'd been hiding, and I told Jake he needed to tell me right now what was going on with his finances, and he started crying and admitted that he had a lot more debt than he'd told me about, and when I asked how much, he said around $200,000. I literally could not process what he was saying at first, because $200,000 is an unfathomable amount of debt for someone our age, and I asked him how the hell he had accumulated that much debt. And he admitted that he had a gambling problem that he'd been hiding from me for our entire relationship, and most of the debt was from gambling losses and the credit cards and loans he'd taken out to chase his losses. I felt like I was going to throw up as Jake explained that he'd been gambling online since before we met, mostly sports betting and online poker, and it had started small but escalated over the years until he was betting thousands of dollars at a time and losing more than he won. And he'd maxed out multiple credit cards and taken out personal loans and even borrowed from friends and family to cover his losses. I asked him how he'd managed to hide this from me for 3 years, and he said he was very careful about keeping his gambling separate from our relationship. He had separate bank accounts I didn't know about, and he'd always been secretive about his phone and computer. And whenever I questioned anything, he'd make up excuses or change the subject until I dropped it. I asked if he was still actively gambling, and he hesitated before admitting that yes, he was. He'd placed bets as recently as last week, and he knew he had a problem, but he kept thinking he'd win big and be able to pay everything off, and I'd never have to know. I was absolutely furious, and I told Jake that he'd been lying to me about something massive for our entire relationship, and more importantly, he'd proposed to me and let me agree to marry him, knowing he was sitting on $200,000 of secret debt that would become my problem once we were legally married. He started apologizing and saying he'd been too ashamed to tell me, and he was planning to get help and get it under control before we got married, and I asked him when exactly he was planning to mention this because we'd literally just had extensive conversations about finances where he lied directly to my face. Jake said he didn't know when he would have told me, maybe after we were married and he'd been going to therapy and making progress on the debt. And I told him so he was planning to trap me in a marriage before revealing he'd financially ruined us. And he said he wouldn't put it that way, but he knew I might not want to marry him if I knew about the debt. I asked Jake to leave our apartment immediately because I needed space to think and I couldn't even look at him. and he begged me not to end the engagement over this, saying we could work through it together and he'd get help for his gambling addiction, and we could make a plan to pay off the debt over time. I told him that the issue wasn't just the debt. It was the lying, and the betrayal, and the fact that he'd let me fall in love with a version of him that didn't exist, and I needed time alone to figure out if I even wanted to continue this relationship, let alone marry him. After Jake left, I pulled his actual credit report, and it was worse than he'd described. $215,000 in total debt spread across 17 different credit cards and loans, and his credit score was in the low 500s, which is considered poor, and there were multiple late payments and accounts in collections. I called my sister, who's a financial advisor, and showed her Jake's credit report, and she was horrified and told me that if I married Jake without a prenup, this debt could affect me too. And even with a prenup, his poor financial decisions would impact our ability to buy a house or qualify for loans together, and she strongly advised me to end the engagement. I spent the next week doing research on gambling addiction and talking to people who've dealt with partners who have hidden debt, and everything I learned made me more convinced that I couldn't marry Jake, at least not anytime soon, and not without serious changes and years of proof that he'd addressed his addiction. Jake called and texted constantly during this week, begging for another chance and promising he'd go to Gamblers Anonymous and get therapy and be completely transparent about his finances going forward. And I finally agreed to meet with him to discuss what would need to happen for me to even consider staying in the relationship. At this meeting, I told Jake that I was ending the engagement and moving out, and if he wanted any chance of us eventually getting back together, he'd need to do several things. Get into intensive therapy for gambling addiction, attend GA meetings regularly, give me full access to all his financial accounts so I could verify he wasn't gambling, create a concrete plan to pay off his debt, and stick to this plan for at least 2 years before I'd consider re-engaging. Jake agreed to all of this and said he understood why I was ending the engagement, and he promised he'd do whatever it took to earn my trust back and prove he could be the partner I deserved. It's been 2 months since I ended the engagement and moved into my own apartment, and Jake has followed through on some of his promises. He's been going to therapy and GA meetings, and he gave me access to his bank accounts, but I've caught him gambling twice in these 2 months despite his promises, and each time he's made excuses about how it was just a small bet and he had it under control. These relapses have confirmed for me that Jake isn't ready to change, and probably won't be for a long time if ever. And I've made the decision to end the relationship completely, rather than waiting around hoping he'll get better. Jake is devastated, and his family has been calling me saying I'm abandoning him when he needs support the most, and his mother actually said that if I really loved him, I'd stand by him through his addiction. And I told her that standing by him doesn't mean marrying him and legally binding myself to his financial disaster. My own family and friends are relieved I ended things. They said they never fully trusted Jake and always thought there was something off about him, and now they understand what that feeling was. The hardest part has been mourning the future I thought I was going to have. I'd been planning a wedding and imagining our life together and thinking about the house we'd buy and the kids we'd have, and now I'm 30 and single again, and starting over with someone new feels exhausting. But I know I made the right decision because I deserve a partner who's honest with me from the beginning, and I can't build a life with someone who's capable of hiding something that massive for that long and who still isn't willing to do the real work to change. So that's my story of how I discovered my fiancé had $200,000 in secret gambling debt, and how I chose to walk away rather than legally binding myself to his financial ruin. Have you ever discovered a partner was hiding major debt or financial problems? And what did you do? Let me know in the comments, and if you think I made the right choice ending the engagement, give this video a like and subscribe for more stories about dodging bullets. Thanks for watching.